I remember the rain in cold hollow like I remember pain, not sharp and sudden but slow, persistent, and intimate. It did not crash the way it does in cities, it hissed and tapped, as if someone was dragging fingernails across old shingles. Our house sat on the only road that cut through the hills, the kind of road lost hunters and drifters follow when they have nowhere else to go. My mother used to call that road a blessing because every knock meant a chance at a meal, a favor, a little cash, some jar of preserves traded for a place by the stove. She believed strangers arrived because God noticed us, because hard times were supposed to come with small mercies. My father never agreed, and he never called it mercy when somebody asked to stay the night. He was afraid of rain long before I understood what fear looked like in an adult. He flinched at thunder like it could split him open. He listened for footsteps on the porch the way other men listen for coyotes near the chicken coop. When the weather turned, he kept the lamps low and the door latched, and his eyes stayed on the window like he expected it to blink. He died early in the season before the leaves had fully fallen, during one of those cold storms that makes the air smell like wet iron. The night he went, he gripped my older brother's wrist so hard his fingernails left bruises that lasted a week. My father did not give a speech, he just kept repeating one thing in a dry, sandpaper voice, that when it rained and someone asked for shelter, we were never to keep them. He made my brother swear it in front of the family Bible, and my brother did, though his eyes kept sliding to the kitchen like he wanted out of the room. When my father's breathing finally stopped, my mother turned away to wipe her face, and in that turning there was something colder than grief. She said my father had gotten old and superstitious, and that rain was just rain and a traveler was just a traveler. I was still young enough to believe what kept the house running, and my mother was the only one who could make poverty feel ordinary. She turned hunger into routine, and routine into something you stop questioning. If she said there was nothing to fear, then fear felt like disobedience, and I learned early that silence was a kind of survival. The woman came on a night when the rain fell thick, heavy enough to muffle the whole valley. The oil lamp in our front room trembled with each gust, throwing shadows that seemed to breathe. She stood on our porch with a torn raincoat and wet hair stuck to her forehead, and she did not beg, she simply looked at the door as if she had been there before. Her hand rested on the latch, pale and steady, nails clean, fingers trembling only at the tips. On her wrist was a red indentation like she had worn a cord too tight for too long. I remember that mark more than her face because it looked like ownership. My mother stared at her longer than politeness required, then smiled the way she smiled at yard sales and clearance bins. She told the woman to come in, to warm up, to sit close to the stove. My brother stood behind her with his mouth slightly open, watching the woman like a dog watches a coop full of hens. I thought of my father's last words, and I thought of my brother's oath, and I did nothing. I did not speak because speaking in our house was never neutral, it always had a cost. I watched the woman step inside and the air felt like it tightened around us just a little. My mother put her in the back room, the storage room where we kept sacks of grain and old tools that smelled of damp wood. I carried an extra blanket, and the woman thanked me in a voice so low I could barely hear it over the rain. Then she asked if people ever went missing around here during storm season, and the question landed like a stone in a still pond. Before I could answer, my mother shut the door with more force than necessary, and I heard the latch click like a decision. That night, the rain could not cover everything, and I heard my mother moving through the house, heard my brother's steps near the back hallway, heard my mother cough hard and often, as if she needed noise to drown out other sounds. In the morning the woman came out looking like she had walked through fever and kept going. Her collar was pulled crooked, her eyes red and dry, her hands clenched in her sleeves. My brother lifted her suddenly, fast and careless, like he was grabbing a feed sack before it split, and my mother spat into the dirt and muttered that no one was ever too good to be kept. The woman grabbed at my brother's shirt, not to cling, but to hold him at a distance, like her hands were trying to create space where there was none. I understood then that not every grip is a plea, some grips are the last thing between a person and a fall. I looked away because looking made me feel complicit, and I did not know how to stop being complicit without becoming a target. My mother locked the back room from the outside and opened it only enough to slide water in. Later that afternoon, my brother brought 3 men from down the road, the kind of men whose voices made dogs go quiet. They were always around when something could be taken and never around when something needed fixing. I stepped in front of the hallway without thinking, my throat tight, hands shaking. My mother grabbed my hair and yanked me aside, and the slap she gave me left my ear ringing for hours. She told me not to interfere, and she said if I cared about that woman, I should have stopped her from stepping inside in the first place. That night I crept to the back room with a bowl of food because there was still some part of me that wanted to be decent, or maybe I was only afraid. The air in there smelled wrong, not like blood but like something wet left too long in a sealed container. The woman leaned against the wall and looked straight at me, calm in a way that made me feel smaller. She said I was ugly, not in my face but in my silence, in the way I watched and did nothing. Then she laughed softly, and it was not a happy sound, it was wind through dead reeds. She told me her family held grudges the way other families held land, and that she had been sent to settle a debt that had been growing for years. Before I backed out, she told me that starting tomorrow, no matter how hungry I got, I should not eat any meat from this hollow. Her voice was steady and it sounded like certainty, not superstition. I stood in the doorway feeling the hairs on my neck lift, and when I turned my head there was nothing behind me but the rain. I did not sleep, and the roof dripped in a steady rhythm like a countdown. In the dark I remembered old stories I had overheard when the men drank, stories told in half sentences and quick laughter. They said Cold Hollow used to have another name, and that the old name should never be spoken out loud because saying it was like calling something home. They said the hollow had once been saved from starvation by a storm so big it changed people, and after that storm the valley had never gone without luck during rainy season. The word luck always sounded wrong in their mouths, like it belonged to someone else. My father had always gone quiet when those stories came up, like he was listening for something outside the walls. A week before he died, I saw him digging under our old pear tree behind the house, deeper than any man digs for roots. Later I watched him pull out a clay jar wrapped in faded red cloth, and inside that cloth was a small piece of bone the color of ivory. He caught me watching and told me if I ever heard my name called during the rain, I should cover my ears and never answer. I thought it was another way to scare a child into obedience, until the woman spoke about debts. That was when the house started feeling like a place built around secrets, like the nails and the boards were hammered in to hold something down. It was hard to believe any of this started with me, and harder to believe it could end with me. 2 mornings later, the woman was dead, and it happened so fast no one learned her real name. Her skin was cold, her body stiff, and the corner of her mouth tilted upward as if she had made peace with something we could not see. My mother cursed her for bringing bad luck, then ordered me to drag her out to the old cemetery on the west ridge where the grass never grew tall and the ground stayed damp even in summer. I pulled her on a wooden sled through mud, and every bump made her head nod like she was agreeing with the road. Near the edge of the cemetery I heard water, but there was no creek, only an old well half filled with dirt, its opening dark like an eye that never shut. I laid her down and covered her with leaves, and that was when I saw the small black dot on her wrist, right where the red indentation had been. It looked like ink at first, and then it seemed to shift slightly when I blinked. I told myself it was my imagination because imagination was safer than truth. I ran home through the rain repeating that this would pass, that it would all pass, the way people repeat prayers they do not believe. When I stepped into the yard, my mother had built a big fire and a pot that was already boiling hard. A rich smell rolled out of the steam, sweet and fatty in a way that made my mouth fill with saliva before I could stop it. My brother stood beside the pot with his eyes bright, saying something had crawled in on its own, and that refusing it would be an insult to Providence. At dawn there was a heap of pale snakes piled at the base of our porch, thick-bodied and slick, their skins the color of milk left too long in the dark. From a distance they looked like wet ropes, but up close I saw tiny heads, pepperseed eyes, tongues tasting the air without threat. They did not strike, they did not flee, they only twitched softly as if waiting to be picked up. The men from the hollow gathered quickly, and nobody asked where the snakes came from. They bent down and grabbed them with their bare hands, laughing as if they had found money in a ditch. My mother's face lit with something that looked like hope, and I realized hope could be ugly when it was starving. The pot boiled all day, and the smell held a pull stronger than hunger, like an invitation wrapped in warmth. I turned my head away and still I heard chewing and soft jokes, and the wet sounds of people swallowing, and it felt like something was being fed. It was not just their bodies, it was whatever lived behind their need. Only one man refused to eat, old Reverend Hale, who used to tend funerals when he still had a voice strong enough for hymns. He sat on a rock by our gate smoking hand-rolled tobacco, his eyes cloudy and tired, watching that pot like he was watching a trap. When I asked why he would not touch it, he stared at me until I looked down, then he said it was not food, it was a contract. That night the groaning started in scattered houses, then spread through the valley like fog. By morning, bellies were swollen and tight, shiny under stretched skin, and you could see movement beneath, slow coils and ripples traveling like snakes under a blanket. The town leader tried to keep people calm, then hurried off to bring in a specialist from the next county, a man rumored to read sickness like scripture. The specialist arrived with his eyes covered, a cane in one hand, a smirk on his mouth. He said the hollow had a serious problem, and that helping would cost him dearly because some things were not meant to be touched. The town leader piled cash on the table like an offering, and the specialist's fingers moved over the bills like they were testing flesh. The next day they found him in a drainage ditch, stripped down to bone. Pale snakes clung to the skeleton, feeding slow and patient, their small teeth working like grains of rice. Nobody stared for long because the longer you looked, the more you recognized them as the same snakes that had simmered in our pot, only now they looked awake. Panic turned the hollow cruel, and cruelty always needed an excuse. People noticed my stomach was flat, and their eyes landed on me like accusation. My mother grabbed my shirt and demanded to know why I was untouched, why I was clean, and when I could not answer she hit me, because she needed someone to blame who did not have a crowd behind him. Old Reverend Hale stepped between us and struck his cane against the ground 3 times, each knocked dry and final. He said my life was his responsibility now, and my mother's anger faltered because the hollow still respected a man who had buried their dead. He cut his own arm, filled a cup with blood, mixed it with water and forced each swollen person to drink a mouthful. It worked for a while and bellies softened, faces regained color, voices steadied, and gratitude poured over him like rain. I watched the wound on his wrist darken around the edges, and I understood he was using his body like a lid on a jar that had already been opened. He was buying time, and time was never free. Late that night I went to his cabin with ash from our stove to help stop the bleeding, the way my mother treated injured animals. He pulled me inside quickly, not with anger but with fear of being overheard. He told me the hollow was sick in a way medicine could not touch, and he said when this ended he would get me out, somewhere with sidewalks and streetlights, somewhere rain was just weather. Before I left, he handed me a small carved token, pale and cold like old bone. He told me to keep it close, and that if he was gone I should trust no one, not even the people who shared my blood. When I tucked it into my pocket, I saw my mother standing on his porch in the dark, not knocking, not moving, just watching the door like she was counting my breaths. 3 days later the sickness returned worse, and the valley turned into a chorus of pain. People clawed at their own skin, then laughed through tears like drunk men at a wake. My brother pointed at Reverend Hale and said if he could save them once, he could do it again, and if he could not, then one old man was a fair price for a whole hollow. I tried to stand in front of him and my mother yanked my hair and threw me into a stone step. My vision filled with sparks and the world tilted, and before everything went dark I saw Reverend Hale looking at me with something like apology. When I woke it was night and in the town leader's yard sat a large iron pot, its lid cracked open, and beside it lay Reverend Hale's clothes folded as neatly as if someone still cared. No one said where he went because everyone knew. They avoided my eyes the way people avoid mirrors when they cannot bear the face inside. I gathered small clean bones in a shirt and buried them under a stunted oak at the cemetery, my hands sinking into wet earth that felt like guilt. I went back to the woman's body because I had a thought I hated, that if she came for payment, then maybe she would accept another kind of payment now. She lay exactly as I left her, not swollen, not rotted, cheeks still full of color like sleep. The pale snakes circled her without touching, as if she belonged to something larger than hunger. That was when a young man appeared on the cemetery path with a clean rain jacket and boots without mud. He introduced himself as Aaron Black, sent by someone who had heard about trouble in the hollow. He looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient who does not fit the chart, and he said quietly that everyone in town smelled wrong except me. Aaron did not go into the hollow immediately, he studied the dark roofs from the edge of the graves like he was watching a pond for movement. He asked about the woman, about who took her in, who touched her, who carried her body, and every question pressed on the same bruised place. I answered carefully, not to protect my mother and brother, but because I still believed, stupidly, that speaking a sin out loud made it heavier. When Aaron reached the woman, his face changed not to horror but to caution. He called her a thing not in cruelty but in recognition, and he laid her out with careful hands. He drove 5 tarnished spikes into the ground around her and into the earth near her limbs, and with each one I heard a sound like a scream trapped under mud, distant and muffled but real. He told me he had to leave for supplies, and that I must stay and keep anyone away because a small mistake would kill the whole hollow. He said there was a hook on me, something placed there by someone who needed me alive, and that was why the sickness had not taken me. When he said that, my pocket felt heavier and the bone token felt less like a gift and more like a key. I sat by the woman's body through the night, telling myself stories to stay awake, listening to the woods breathe. I spoke softly to her without meaning to, saying I never wanted her harmed, saying I was only a kid in a house where silence was currency. The wind moved through the cemetery grass, and the spikes hummed faintly, and the corner of her mouth seemed to lift just a fraction. Near dawn, footsteps rushed through leaves, and I was kicked hard before I could stand. My brother and a few men stumbled into the cemetery smelling of liquor and fear, laughing with that loose, mean confidence that comes when people think forgiveness is guaranteed. He said the woman was the source, and that men had ways of dealing with sources, and their hands reached for her as if she was property. After they left, I knelt beside her and touched her wrist, and her skin was not cold anymore. It held the faint warmth of a body recently alive, and my stomach dropped with it. When Aaron returned, he saw the change immediately, and his grip crushed my forearm as he demanded to know if anyone had been here, and I lied because my throat could not handle truth. Aaron's eyes stayed on me longer than anger should last, and then he exhaled like defeat. He said whatever was in that body was gathering weight, and the spikes would not hold much longer. He told me to fetch a red-painted coffin and 4 strong men who looked gentle, because gentle men were easier to use without questions. They came proud of themselves, eager to be chosen for something good. When we reached the cemetery, Aaron had removed the spikes, and there were no punctures in the woman's skin, as if nothing had ever pinned her. When we tried to lift her, I understood why he wanted help, because she was heavy in a way flesh should not be, heavy like stone, heavy like soaked earth. We got her into the coffin with grunts and trembling arms, and one man asked why she weighed like that. Aaron said the air around her had thickened, and then he stepped close and moved with the calm efficiency of a butcher. He killed those 4 men quickly, caught their blood, and used it like paint, drawing a ring around the coffin with motions practiced enough to be terrifying. Back in town, people crowded Aaron and thanked him for saving them, and no one asked where the 4 men went. They did not remember their names because need erases memory the way rain erases footprints. Aaron stayed in our house that night, weak from whatever he had done, and my mother treated him with sudden warmth, the kind you give to a blade you hope will cut in your favor. I lay awake and listened to my mother whispering with my brother in the front room. I heard my name and I heard the word hook again, and I heard my mother say the token was not protection, it was a handle. I understood then that my father's fear had not been of rain alone, it had been of what rain allowed people to do. In the morning Aaron confronted me, and I placed the token on the table with shaking hands. When it touched the wood, it made a small hard sound like stone against metal. He turned it over and found a thin carved line, and his mouth tightened as if he had solved a dirty puzzle. He told me it was a soul switch charm, meant to trade places, to move one person into another like changing coats. He said Reverend Hale had been desperate and lonely, afraid of dying without peace, and he had chosen me because I was clean enough to hold what he wanted to keep. He said men like Hale did not always die when they were killed, sometimes they died in a way that made others carry them. I asked why Hale would promise to save me, why he would die in front of me if he wanted to live. Aaron said some people choose the right moment to die so their death becomes a bond, and bonds are stronger than locks. He said Hale died when the Hollow needed a hero, when I needed someone good, and when the woman's body needed fresh blood to wake. I walked outside and watched my mother and brother eat breakfast like nothing had happened, chewing slow, living like they had not helped the world turn rotten. In that moment something in me collapsed, not into rage but into clarity. I realized nobody was coming to rescue me, and being good had only ever made me useful. Aaron ordered the town to rebuild the grave, to cover the coffin in fresh earth, to make a payment with their labor. They did it obediently because obedience is easy when the alternative is pain. As dusk fell, Aaron said someone had to stay by the grave overnight, someone who would draw the sickness into themselves long enough for the ground to settle, and every face turned away, hungry for someone else to be brave. My mother stepped forward and pushed me ahead of her, saying I volunteered, her voice smooth as if she had rehearsed it. I said I would do it, not because I wanted to save them but because resistance would get me torn apart. Aaron studied me with a look that almost held pity, then he told me to keep the coffin sealed, keep my hands off his markings and keep the lantern lit. When the Hollow emptied back into their houses, the cemetery felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I walked to the red coffin and placed my palm on the lid, and cold seeped into me as if the wood was drawing warmth for itself. I began wiping at the dried blood ring, carefully, slowly, not erasing everything, just opening a thin break like cracking a window. From inside came a soft knock, not loud, not dramatic, the sound of someone tapping from the other side of a wall. Relief flooded me in a way that shamed me because I needed whatever was in there awake. I needed it strong enough to pull the hook out of me, strong enough to take the ones who had fed themselves on other people and still called it luck. I ran back toward town as night fell, and what I found broke the last soft part of me. Bellies swelled again, then split, and pale snakes poured from people like spilled grain, biting, rapping, searching for warmth. My brother lay in the dirt with his eyes open, empty in a way bodies should not be, and my mother sat against the porch post making small sounds that were not words anymore. Aaron was inside our house, pale and barely breathing, his strength spent. When he saw me, his expression changed and he demanded to know what I had done, and my voice stayed calm in a way I did not recognize. I told him I wanted to live and I had asked for help, and he chose balance over me, so I chose myself over them. He closed his eyes as if arguing would require energy he did not have. Outside, the screaming thinned, then stopped, and the only sound left was the dry sliding of snakes across old shingles and porch boards, the slow chewing of something being finished. The rain started again and it sounded like the house was remembering everything. When the hollow went quiet, I walked back to the cemetery because there was nowhere else to go. The grave looked disturbed, soft earth stamped with overlapping footprints as if the whole town had passed through and vanished. The coffin lid sat slightly crooked, and the blood ring was dull, and the air smelled sweet and rotten at the same time. The woman stepped out from behind the coffin as if she had been waiting, her raincoat clean, her face still warm with color, her eyes dark like the old well. She did not ask questions, she simply looked at me with the patience of someone finishing a long job. She said she had removed the hook, that she had repaid me for the bowl of food, and that from now on we owed each other nothing. Then she spoke of my father and of storms long before my birth, and of travelers who knocked in the rain and never left. She said the hollow's hunger had learned how to walk, and it only needed one thing, a person caught outside, and a door opened by someone who wanted more than they had. She said my father tried to stop too late because habits do not die, they only sleep and rain wakes them. I asked what was left for me and she told me to live but not cleanly. She said living would mean carrying the memory out into the world, and feeling the weight of what it cost, and deciding again and again what kind of person I would be when the weather turned. She said her family paid debts properly, and even after payment there was always interest. I left the hollow the next morning, carrying the token that no longer felt warm, carrying smells I could not wash from my hair. In the city I kept my head down and took small jobs and pretended I was ordinary because ordinary was the only thing that felt safe. Years passed and I almost believed I had escaped, until one night when rain tapped my apartment door 3 times, dry and measured like a cane on wood. I stood up without meaning to, my hand moving toward the lock as if someone else had rehearsed it. Under the skin near my ankle, something shifted in a slow line, and the memory of pale coils under stretched flesh rose in my throat. I did not open the door, I waited until the tapping stopped, then I turned around and saw a thin wet smear on my kitchen floor, and a small pale snake twitching quietly beside the trash can. I do not remember bending down and I do not remember picking it up because the memory goes foggy right there like rain on glass. I only remember waking the next morning to a pot already simmering, ginger and herbs I did not buy scenting the air, and my hands slick with something that would not rinse away. When it rains now, I avoid windows, I avoid doors, and still I hear that careful tapping, not outside but deep in my chest as if something patient is asking to be let out.